Alright y'all, today I just want to talk a little bit about torque converters for these trucks. Here's my first gen. I got the topper on it because I got a little camping trip coming up, but Dodge in the Cummins trucks 89 to 93, the first gens, they had a non-lockup torque converter, and that was kind of the beginnings of them figuring out a diesel transmission. The 89 to 91 and a half was a 3-speed, non-overdrive, non-lockup, and then 91 and a half to 93 was an overdrive transmission, known as the A518. The older 3-speed was a 727, and the 727 goes back to muscle car era. I mean, they had them in a lot of cars, just different bell housing pattern and some changes. But so this is a non-lockup torque converter truck here. And if we go over here to the 94 or my 2001, either one, these are an overdrive 4-speed, basically 3-speed with overdrive if you want to call it that, but it's 4-speed with torque converter lockup. And torque converter lockup really helps you get power to the ground. From the factory, the PCM on these trucks only lock up in 4th gear, unless you have a newer 24 valve. Some of them had programming from the factory, and they would lock in 3rd, unlock and shift to 4th, and lock up in 4th gear, which is what my 2001 does. It's nicer than the setup that this truck has, where it just locks in overdrive only. I have a lockup switch in both trucks, so I can lock the torque converter anytime I want. But I kind of just wanted to talk about torque converter selection. I'm not going to get too much into stall speeds, but because that's a whole can of worms. And the builder really needs to, you really need to have that conversation with whoever's building your torque converter for you. But basically, I just kind of want to talk more so single disc versus triple disc torque converter. Now, my dually has a DPC, diesel performance converters, single disc, billet single disc, reman is what he calls it, which I assume is a billet single disc core that he gets in and rebuilds to his specs. And at the time I got it really cheap. It was brand new, and the stall speed on it is much nicer than stock. It doesn't rev a bunch, it kind of puts the power down, and it does really good on lower levels of the edge. And I'm running stock injectors, just the edge and fuel system and intake and exhaust basically. It does really good on the lower levels, but I can't put this truck up on anything really past about 3 without shuttering the torque converter pretty good at lower throttle inputs, or if I'm kind of lugging it. It holds okay if you just hold it on the floor. The reason for that is these trucks use a throttle valve. The throttle valve is directly connected to your pedal, and the more pedal you give it, the farther it pulls the throttle valve open, and the higher it raises the line pressure in the transmission. Ultimately, it's limited by how your valve body is set up, but basically at full throttle you have full line pressure, and it ramps down from there, or it ramps up from idle to wide open throttle. But the problem is kind of at light throttle inputs, these Cummins are capable of making so much torque, especially once they're modified. I mean, this truck here with just it's got the 4000 governor spring in it, it makes the throttle really touchy and responsive. And I mean, quarter throttle, this thing will really put out at low RPM with that HE351 turbo. It spools quick. And I mean, it puts out a lot of, quite a bit of torque down low. And Same with this truck. It's not got quite as much fuel, but it's a big heavy truck and it still makes some pretty good torque. And a single disc converter just has a hard time keeping up with that, and that's just my opinion. You know, there's some people that'll argue a single disc is good to 500 horsepower. You know, they haven't had trouble, been running one for years. You know, I don't know. Maybe they, maybe they have. Maybe they get away with that. I do not recommend a single disc torque converter, and like I said, this is my humble opinion and my experience. I do not recommend a single disc torque converter if you're trying to make anything over probably 260 or 75 horsepower to the wheels. And line pressure has a little bit to do with that. This truck, I think I'm about 155 psi on the line pressure. I did turn it up some from when I first built it. I think when I started out it was around 130. And I believe factory is closer to 100, 110 maybe. This truck has a Goering full, well, okay, and this truck has a Transgo shift kit in it. I built the valve body in this truck myself on the bench, and I adjusted the line pressure kind of where I wanted it. This truck has a full Goering valve body and has had for a long time, and it does, you know, a good job. I don't know what the line pressure is set up on it. I trust that Goering knows how it needs to be set up, so I never have bothered checking it. But so this truck, so you know, I got a single disc in this one. This truck I've had since 2003. I started out with a single disc torque converter. Well, it had the factory one when I bought it. Then I put a Transgo shift kit in it, and then I put a Goering, or Garand as they pronounce it. I'm from the South, so for some reason I say Goering. But anyway, I bought their single disc billet torque converter, and by billet, that just means the front cover's billet. It's less likely to warp, and you don't have the mounting lugs to rip off, and I'll show you all that in a minute. But I put a single disc billet Goering in this truck, like I said, a long time ago, probably 2004 or 5. Anyhow, it was a great converter as far as stall speed, but at the time I only had a fuel plate and a governor spring, and I still was able to slip the converter. I don't remember if I had the Goering valve body with it at that time. I put it in after the converter at some point, but I don't remember, and so I don't want to make that claim. But like I said, I had a Transgo kit. I was still able to slip the converter in overdrive. It did do pretty good. Like I said, at wide open throttle is actually better than part throttle sometimes, just because of the way the throttle valve works on these. But it only took me a year or two, and I decided I wanted a triple disc because you know, it's kind of nice to be able to use the torque these things make and to just lay down on them, you know, and let them pull. So I bought a Goering triple disc for this truck, and it was awesome. I mean, you know, just when that thing locked, it's just immediate, and it puts the power to the ground, doesn't shudder, doesn't slip, and it just made all the difference. And that, you know, it is quite a bit more expensive to buy a triple disc, but basically, you know, if you think about it, you're multiplying the lockup clutch area of the torque converter by, you know, I'm assuming 3 times. I can't remember exactly how that works, but Goering has some videos on that actually, I think on their website, but or on YouTube actually. They have a YouTube account. But anyway, I ran that for a little bit, twisted my stock input shaft in two, and I was young at the time. I bought a billet input shaft and just stuck everything back together and put the transmission back in. I don't know, this was probably 2008 or so. 2000, yeah, probably 2007 or 8. I was being hard on it when I broke it. It probably still only had around 300 wheel horsepower, but I stuck my foot to the floor and had it locked in second, and it made the 2 to 3 shift locked, and that billet triple disc just doesn't have any give. They do have a sprung hub in them to help to help smooth out the lockup, but once they lock, they're pretty solid. They don't have a lot of forgiveness to them. So I broke my stock input shaft, which are not overly strong to begin with. And this transmission's not been quite right since. It doesn't lock immediate when you flip the switch, or when it commands it to. You can tell there's kind of a delay, and it doesn't lock near as solid as it used to. It may be as simple as having something hung in the valve body, in one of the circuits in there, or it could have damaged the seal on the torque converter. Either way, goodness, that's been, my math's not too good, but that's been 15 years ago anyway. And so the thing's still going. It does slip some. It doesn't hold like it used to, but that's totally my fault. That torque converter would be going just like if it was new, I have no doubt, because it's still putting up with a lot of abuse. So, and at some point when I get into doing what I want to do to this truck, that'll be fixed as well. I'll send the converter back and have it freshened up, and I'll probably go through the transmission myself. This truck, my 01, I did put a billet input shaft in when I bought it, because I thought that there was a chance that I would do a triple disc at some point. I kind of knew better than to go with a single disc, but I was trying to budget the transmission at the time, and I thought, well, I got a good deal on their DPC billet reman, and so I went that route. But I kind of knew I really should have gone triple disc from the get-go. I just kind of talked myself into the single disc because I wasn't planning on really hot rodding that truck too much. But I'll show you. And as far as DPC versus Garand converters, Garand is out of Iowa. DPC, I can't remember. I want to say, I'm not going to say because I can't remember. I've not had any trouble with either of them. I think they both are very capable. DPC converters are in a lot of big name transmissions, and same for Garand. And so like I said, I'm not going to bash either company. Both their converters have really been good for me, and by me saying that DPC reman single slips some, that's not me dogging them. I just think that's what you get when you buy a single disc. And there may be some single discs that have better clutch material. I think this one's supposed to have better clutch material than stock, but there may be some that are even beefier still. But why bother, honestly? If you're riding that line, just go triple disc and be done with it. Triple disc, almost anybody's triple disc ought to hold 1,000 horse easy. And if you've just got a street truck, you'll be golden. So now this is a stock 47 RE. I'm sorry it's getting dark. You can see the mounting lugs. Those little nuts sticking out, those are the mounting lugs on a stock 47 RE torque converter. You can, when you add a lot of power to those transmissions, just a stock 47 RE, if you don't, I'm talking about if you really add some power and abuse one, you can actually balloon the converters because they're just a stamped cover. And you can rip, I've heard of people, bending the lugs or whatever. I've never done it. I've never seen it done. They act like you can rip them off, but you'd really, really, really have to be overdoing it to get that deep with them. But, they're just not, they're not near as suitable as a billet cover for big power. Let's walk in here. So I figure while the engine's out of my dually and I'm staring it in the teeth, I might as well go ahead and put a triple disc in it, which is what I should have done from the get-go. There's the number. They don't give these things away, but I'm telling you, they make a quality converter. I went with the 15 SS stall speed. It was between this and the DA stall. I talked to, I think it was Dave. He recommended the 15 SS or the DA, depending on what I, really just my decision, whichever one. He said either one would work okay. There's a lot of math and a lot of explaining that goes into the differences in these two, in the 15 SS and the DA torque converter stalls. I don't want to get too much into that because it never ends really. Every converter stall can be a little different. But basically this is probably their most low stall converter. He said I'd be fine. I said at some point and I really don't know that I plan on it, but at some point there's a chance I could, maybe upgrade turbos on the dually. And he said that, I mentioned, 62 would be as big as I would ever go probably. And he said that the 15 SS or the DA, either one would be okay, but the DA would spool that, a turbo, any turbo, just a little better. But I kind of like the feeling of a better coupling at low RPM when you're just cruising around town. But I don't know. We'll see. I hope I made the right choice. I almost went DA, and I really think either one would have been fine. But hopefully this one spools, plenty fast and really couples and puts, I know it'll couple and put the power down. Goerns converters are, they do their homework on them. These aren't just, they don't just buy, some parts and put something together. They're constantly testing and improving and building their own parts for these things. Now this is the billet cutter. And you can see it's a flat mounting surface. There are no lugs. This is just a billet piece of steel. And the holes are threaded right into it. There's really nothing to tear up there. This will never balloon or warp. You'd have to get it severely hot. But just super beefy. That thing's heavy. It's got a drain plug in it. And this is not a Garand infomercial. I'm not sponsored in any way. I've just always really liked their stuff. The rebuild kit that I put in my dually, I built the transmission with Garand's master rebuild kit. I just, like I said, I've always liked their stuff. Always had good customer service out of them. And so I just decided to go this route. And also, oddly enough, you don't get any more back on the core. Well, at least DPC wouldn't give me any more back on the core for sending in his billet single disc back to him if I were to buy a triple disc through him. And I didn't ask Garand if they did anything for that because I don't, DPC sells that reman converter, which is what I have. He could have freshened it up, I guess, and resold it as that. I don't want to speak out of line here. I think that's what he probably could have done, but they're not a super expensive converter, so I kind of understand him not being able to give much more back. But anyhow, I ended up on the transmission outside that I just showed you that the torque converter is in. I'm going to send that stock one back. I'll still have my DPC single disc reman converter laying around here for whatever. Dad's got a couple of trucks with 47 REs. And there's always a chance. Let me get a light. There's always a chance that at some point I decide I'm going to put a lockup transmission in my first gen. That's a common modification But I'll show you this a little better. You can see the welded on lugs. So this has already gotten a little longer than I had anticipated. But my point here is, if you're going to try to make much power, in my experience twice now, the single disc torque converters just fall short of being able to hold up to the Cummins torque at low RPM. I mean, these things will put out, you know, 600 or 700 foot-pounds pretty easy at 1500 RPM with a small turbo. And there's just not enough clutch material there to handle it well, in my opinion. And there may be some builders that, you know, say with the correct valve body or whatever, that can be improved, and I'm sure it can. But like I said, if you're riding that line, you might as well just get a triple disc. If you've got a pretty stock truck, I can't see you know, much issue with putting a single disc in if you're not planning on going crazy. If you're not, I'm talking about pretty stock though. I mean, that would be my opinion. I wouldn't want to be planning on too much. It's just not fun when you can't, you know, use your power good. So anyway, I just recommend a triple disc if you're going to be hot rodding, or if you're making much power at all. Because I mean, on a, you know, a second gen Cummins, 300 horse doesn't sound crazy, but I mean, that's 700 foot-pounds of torque roughly. So I mean, that's a lot of torque, especially going through a transmission that wasn't designed but for, you know, 400 foot-pounds at the crankshaft. You know, you're putting out 700 foot-pounds at the wheel, so you can easily say that you've doubled torque input through the transmission. Anyway, I hope this was somewhat informative. I hope I didn't drag along too much. Try to be kind of, you know, explain where I'm coming from with the throttle valve and everything. A lot of times it doesn't make sense if you just tell somebody that the torque converter doesn't hold as good at light throttle as it does at full throttle. But, you know, that throttle valve is why. It's also why on the later trucks, well, it's one reason why probably they went to an electric throttle valve. The PCM can command full line pressure whenever it wants in the third gen trucks. I can't remember what year they switched over, but, you know, they made some improvements. So anyway, appreciate y'all watching. If you got questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. I'm not a transmission specialist. I've just learned a little bit by driving these trucks with automatics in them over the years. And they're not as bad as people say they are. That's my opinion. I've never rebuilt the transmission in this gray truck. I put better parts in it. I broke the input shaft, but aside from that, this thing is hung tough. I mean, I've put almost 140,000 miles on it, and, you know, pulling, drag racing, daily driving, just so, you know, they're better than they get credit for, I think. But I appreciate y'all watching, and I'll catch you next time.